Welcome to the podcast, Georgia. Thanks for
Thanks
being
for having
here.
me.
Exciting. I'm looking forward to hearing your stories of the births of your boys who are about to turn 1 on Sunday and three and a
Yeah,
half. Yeah,
yes.
awesome. So let us hear what it was like for you from the beginning in terms of, I know that you planned a home birth with your first baby, which is quite unusual, really. Most people who
Mhm.
birth at home still choose to birth their first baby in the hospital. So tell us came, how it came to be that you were planning to birth your first baby at home.
Yeah, I was thinking about this the other day and trying to work out where it started. And I think my friend was studying midwifery like years before I was thinking about having babies. And she talked about her hospital placements versus home birth placements. And she talked about how in the hospital they're always alert and waiting for something to go wrong. Um, and therefore more likely to intervene when it's really unnecessary. And I think that just sat in the back of my head for a few years. And then I had a few people kind of in my outer circle having home births. So it was just on my radar as a valid option. And yeah, so when I picked my midwife, for me, it was between the birth centre or home. And our birth centre at that stage was open 5 days a week during business hours. And that didn't sound ideal. Um, and so I chose a midwife who was comfortable with home births hospital and the birthing centre, knowing that I wanted to leave my options open. Um, but then with the birthing centre hours, I ultimately decided home would be a much better option. Yeah.
It makes sense, right? Like you don't know when you're going to go into labor. So,
Yes. Yes. And I don't want to be panicking if my favored option is not an option and
yeah,
trying to scramble for what I want.
yeah, absolutely. So share with us about how your birth went.
Yeah. So throughout my pregnancy, I was having all the like midwife appointments and um, had my fundal measurements taken. And I can't remember at what point. I think it was around 24 weeks that no, that can't be right. I don't know. At some stage, those measurements started looking a lot bigger than we were expecting, even for my customized chart. And so my midwife referred me for some scans, as she was supposed to, like according to their protocols. Um, and those were all showing like a big baby. Um, and so we started having discussions around like obstetrician referrals, which I accepted, and not really knowing that once there's an obstetrician involved, home birth is not even an option that you'd talk about, um, or from their perspective. And yeah, I was probably just a bit naive. So went along to the obstetrician appointment, had some more scans. Bubba was still tracking. He was on my notes, it said if he's tracking to be over 5 kilos at birth, they would be talking about offering an elective C-section. And at that point, he was not tracking. He was tracking to be under 5 kilos, which, I mean, scans, we know.
They're not particularly
Um,
accurate.
Not particularly accurate. And so I said, either way, I want to have a vaginal birth. And so like looking at my notes, they've got the hospital plan that they plan for you, and it's like doctors all on the floor kind of thing, low threshold for episiotomy, and help with the birth of the head, that kind of thing. Um, and yeah, so yeah, shifted from planning a home birth to planning a hospital birth, and then a
Can
week.
can I interrupt and just
Yeah.
ask, Georgia, what was your midwife's response to what you were hearing in the hospital? Like the system was the obstetricians were telling you this is what you need to do in order to, you know, we need to do these things in order to ensure the safety of your baby. And presumably they were talking things like shoulder dystocia or baby getting
Yeah.
stuck. Yeah. And what were you hearing outside of what the obstetrician was saying when you went to see your midwife?
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, she was kind of she was supportive of a hospital birth, probably more so than a home birth at that point. Um, and we actually had discussions like during my second pregnancy, which I'll get to. But her practice had evolved quite a bit in that time between my two babies, and which was great. But
Mm.
yeah, she was at that stage definitely more on the side of, yeah, I think a hospital birth would be wise. Um,
So that's that, like just to put it in really blunt terms, she was also feeding the fears around,
yeah,
okay, you've got a big baby here, and the safest thing to do would be to be in hospital where they can mitigate these issues of like a stuck baby or shoulder dystocia, etc.
yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yes, I'd say that's fair.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. So with all of that, I did decide a hospital birth felt safest. Um, Part of that as well was that I was an ICU nurse at the time. And so that, not that that made me think that birth was unsafe. I had like all my colleagues in my ears, like, I don't do a home birth. And so I kind of stopped mentioning it.
Mm.
Um, but yes, a lot of fear. But I would say I didn't feel particularly fearful of birth. Like I felt quite confident. Um, and also because I was like I'd lived in the hospital just about for the last couple of years. So I felt quite comfortable being in the hospital. And for that reason, it didn't feel like a scary environment to be in.
Sweet. Yeah.
Yeah, so that definitely helped. Yeah, obviously still not ideal. So yeah, decided that we'd go into hospital. And then 3 days before I hit 40 weeks, we went into level 4 lockdown. And it, like I remember it was a Tuesday and we had this announcement, I think at about 6 p.m. and I just burst into tears because I didn't know if Tony was going to be able to come with me. And I knew that any support people I had wanted there definitely wouldn't be able to come. Um, so that, yeah, that was a really tricky factor because, yeah, suddenly hospital didn't feel as safe because I just didn't know. And so the next week, I was just waiting to hear what the rules were going to be. Um, and I can't remember how far out from my birth, but eventually learned that Tony would be able to be with me in labour and only if I was in active labour because my sister-in-law's sister-in-law, so a little bit removed, she had a baby, I think a few days before me, and her waters had broken at home and there was a lot of blood, I think. And she went into the hospital, but she wasn't classed as being in active labor. So her husband was sent home and she had to do most of her labor alone in hospital. And then he came in towards the end. So I feared that that kind of thing could happen. Um, but yeah, apart from that, learned that Tony would be able to be with me until 4 hours after birth and then go home. And at that stage as well, I thought I would go home. Like I'd just go to the hospital, have my baby, and then come home with my family. Um, and then I, when was it? It was around then as well. We went in for one of my OB appointments, and I said to Tony on the way, if they offer a stretch and sweep, I'm going to accept. I didn't realize, I kind of didn't know much about the risks of stretch and sweeps and that it was a form of induction. It was my like, oh, I'll avoid induction kind of decision. So they offered a stretch and sweep. I was like, yeah, yes, please. Um, so they did that. I had contractions for a night, woke up in the morning and they stopped and was like, cool. And then the following week, so this was a Monday, I went to see my midwife and we talked about doing another stretch and sweep, and I said I would quite like to, which admittedly she was kind of reluctant to do, and she was quite good at educating me around the risks, which the hospital hadn't done. Um, my son's in the background. Um, yeah, so had the second stretch and sweep. I went home and I remember just walking around being like, I'm feeling crampy, and telling Tony I thought this could be it. Um, and yeah, sure enough, the cramps kind of increased over the afternoon. We went for a walk down the road, which was really lovely. Um, Came back and had a bath, and then I'd written this birth plan, which was mostly surrounding the comfort measures I wanted. So one, I wanted to play games, like board games that I loved, and I wanted to watch. My favorite show at the time was Brooklyn Nine-Nine, so I wanted to watch that. Um, and Tony set up. We were playing Ticket to Ride at the time, all the time. So he set that up, and I looked at it. I was like, put it back. I don't want it. So he packed it all up again. And then we put Brooklyn Nine-Nine on, and I don't even think we got through the introduction of the show. I was like, turn it off, it's horrible. Um, so I think at that point I knew that was definitely labor, that I hated all the things I thought I'd like. Um, and then I think we watched half a movie, which was tolerable. And then I went to bed and just was really uncomfortable. Lying down felt horrible. So I stayed in bed for a few hours. I put the TENS machine on. Um, and then it must have been 1 or 2 in the morning, maybe, that I went out into the living room because it just felt really pointless being in bed because I was so uncomfortable. Um, I think Tony came with me and I was on the Swiss ball. The cat came for cuddles, which he's not the most friendly cat, so that was nice. Um, and yeah, I just cruised around the lounge, feeling really horrible. And as well, so when I was pregnant, I read a couple of books. One of them was about hypnobirthing, and one was Ina May's Guide to Childbirth. And I read the hypnobirthing one first, and it talked about the fear, tension, pain cycle. So I was aware of that. Um, but I took it a bit too seriously, maybe, or didn't. Yeah, the way I took it was that I didn't feel scared of birth. So therefore, I wouldn't have as much tension and I wouldn't experience pain. And I'd heard women talk about pressure instead of pain, and sensations and waves, which probably helped them, but it didn't help me because when I experienced pain, I was quite shocked.
Right.
So I think that kind of threw me, where I was feeling a bit not panicky, but I just froze up. So maybe that was panic, just it looked different to what I expected. Um, yeah, so I spent a lot of time like tensing against contractions, and my husband had looked into the acupressure points, so he was pressing one on my ankle that was supposed to help baby descend. Just like, don't do that again. Um, because I think it helped. I felt definitely some strong pain. Um, but yeah, I didn't want that. I didn't want pain. I didn't want to sit on the toilet because that was more painful.
Mm.
And yeah, I just had a really hard time surrendering to all of it.
Mm.
And around 5 in the morning, maybe a bit earlier, I was like, look, I really want to go into a hospital now. I want you to call our midwife. And Tony said, your contractions aren't regular. Um, so it's probably not active labor yet. We probably should stay home. I was like, call her now. Um, and I like reflecting on it later, like I felt like I'd kind of failed because I had gone to hospital earlier than I needed to, and like I had felt like I needed to be rescued. But then in my second pregnancy, I read Rachel Reed's book, Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Practice. And she talked about when you're in early labor and you nest and you need to be in, or like a lot of women experience and need to be in the place where they're going to give birth. I was like, that was what it was. Like I wasn't just being a bit silly or weak. Like I was getting to this place that felt safe to give birth because that was where I had chosen to give birth.
Mm.
So that, yeah, that was a really helpful thing to read and understand.
That whole book, and it's Reclaiming Childbirth as a Rite of Passage.
That's
Yeah,
that's the one.
yeah, is so brilliant. And I think
Mm,
I just whilst we have this little break in your story, just reflecting on what you said about the pain and the fear tension pain cycle that you'd learned, and I don't know a lot about hypnobirthing because it's not something I've studied myself, but I know that for some people, the idea of doing hypnobirthing is around being able to have a pain-free birth, being able to just breathe my baby out, um, and I know it's not like that for everyone, and I know that a lot of people get amazing, amazing value out of um, doing their hypnobirthing course, but but I do think it's problematic when we are set up to believe that birth can be pain-free. And indeed, for some people, it is. I think that is absolutely the exception rather than the rule. No matter how no matter how safe you feel, no matter how trusting of your physiology, no matter how well supported you are, no matter how um, little fear there is, for most people, birth is still a painful experience. Uh, and yeah, I don't recall what Rachel Reed talks about in her book around pain, but I've been reflecting on some of what I hear Rhea Dempsey talk about in her book Birth with Confidence, and which is a great book too, one that I highly recommend to um, yeah, first time mums, um, is that it's not we shouldn't be teaching that birth isn't painful, but rather just helping people to shift their perspective around pain and birth, that it's not pain that is pointing us to something that we need to fix, or that something that's going wrong, or is pathological pain, but rather it's functional pain, and it's pain with a purpose, and it's healthy. It's a normal, healthy part of the experience of our tissues really stretching up, and our stretch receptors really getting a good a good workout, and those sorts of things. So um, yeah, so I digress, but I do think the fact that you believed that birth shouldn't be painful ultimately made your birth more painful because it induced fear in you, and the fear tension pain cycle became the reality. Yeah.
yeah, exactly that. Yeah. Um, yeah, you've summed that all up. Like that was exactly my experience from my first birth to my second birth. Just what I expected and what felt safe. And it was really interesting when I read Ina May's Guide to Childbirth after the hypnobirthing book. It was really unfortunate because all these women were using the word pain, and I was like, well, they were just doing it wrong. Which is like, it's almost embarrassing to admit that I thought that, but I just thought, they're using the word pain, they're setting themselves up for failure because they don't. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
they should use the word pressure. No, no. And yeah, and Rachel Reed actually does talk about that, about pain being a valid experience and quite a normal experience, and it's not dangerous.
And I
Um,
think part of that rite of passage, I think that like in my belief, in my world, I believe that birth is inherently designed to be a very challenging experience physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually. because it is a rite of passage. It is this big, massive change we're going through we need to be challenged on all those levels to come out the other side of that and be like, yeah, like look at what I'm capable of. Like, wow, I did that without, the need for interventions or medical pain relief or whatever. I can do anything. And then the next bit, the really hard bit, the really challenging bit, which is like learning to parent and respond to this little newborn that is completely dependent on you tuning in to your innate wisdom around how to mother that newborn, listening to your intuition, following your instincts, um, is that's you're primed to do that, right? Like, and so that's why I think it's so part of the reason I'm so passionate about this birth trauma work that I do and trying to reduce the amount of trauma that women are experiencing. Part of that is because they are entering this motherhood journey with so little self-belief and thinking that they've failed at birth, and that's often leads to difficulties with breastfeeding as well. So they'll often be left with the perception that they failed to breastfeed and failed to bond with their baby, another effect or outcome of a traumatic birth. So they are so limited in their ability to really just trust themselves and tune in to their inner wisdom and all that stuff because they just don't have that self-belief that birth is designed to, bring about for them. Um, yeah.
Mm. Yeah, yeah. And I can see like the flow on of that, even from like a birth that wasn't like I wouldn't put the label traumatic on my first birth, but it wasn't right. It wasn't what it should have been. And I can see the flow on of that into my mothering and even into Tony's parenting as he was learning this new baby. Like we had such a hard time with that versus our second baby, which, yes, we know so much more about what we're doing, but the way we trusted birth the second time, we trusted like newborning and we can trust so much more of just what is normal, normal and hard.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
absolutely. All right, back to your story.
Yes, yes. So we went to hospital very early in the morning and we I can't really remember much of check-in and all of that stuff. We just arrived and then I just got on my posy on the edge of the bed, sitting really upright and really stiff, and resisting any contractions that came. Um, I had a VE not long after we came in, and I was at 7 centimeters, and which I was quite chuffed with. Um, and my contractions were still quite irregular though. And so my midwife she was encouraging me to move more and suggested going up and down the stairs sideways. Because she could feel my baby's head just wasn't quite in the right position. He was just a bit wonky. Um, so we did some stairs and and masks had just been introduced. So I was allowed my mask off in the room, but I had to put it back on and I'd made this ridiculously thick 3-layer mask with like flannel sheets. Um, so I was wearing that up and down the stairs and it was just so gross. Um, and yeah, when we came back to the room, though, my contractions did become regular, like 5 minutes apart. And I did move a bit more in that period after that, which was helpful. Um, and then maybe an hour or two after that, my midwife asked if I would like my waters broken, and I said yes, please. Um, so hopped on the bed, did that, and it was like immediately into transition from there. Like I just felt everything change and it was so much harder. And I knew, like I'd read about kind of I have different feelings about stages of labor now, but at that stage I was like, yep, this is transition. And I said to my midwife, I was like, I've heard this can last up to an hour. And she's like, you read too much, but in a joking way. And then it lasted 2 hours.
Wow.
And yeah, like 2 hours of just feeling like I couldn't do it.
Mm.
I was still quite like conscious and aware of what was going on around me. Like I remembered that I'd wanted the bin in the bathroom at home emptied and we hadn't done that. So I turned to Tony during like hard out labor. I was like, can you please empty the bin in the bathroom later? And he's like, yup. He thought I meant the hospital bathroom. And he's like, this woman. Um, but and then I was very vocal. I roar through my labors and I remember like roaring and then calling out, sorry, neighbors, like just thinking about the women in the rooms around me and then carrying on roaring, um, which is funny to reflect on. And just, yeah, so much of it I look back on and see a shift from my first to my second labor, where for my second labor, I beforehand I let my neighbor on our side of like the bedroom side of the house know like I'm having a home birth. I'm
Mm.
loud, probably.
Mm.
Um, and but I didn't apologize. It's just like,
Mm.
yep, I'm loud. I'm having a baby. Everything is okay.
Mhm.
Um, and I loved seeing that shift from apologetic to owning it. Um, so yeah, had a couple of hours of feeling really horrible. Um, And then I started feeling pushy, and the I, my midwife was talking with doctors, but always outside the room. There's only one point in my labor where a doctor came in, but they were, I think she might have told me about it later, that they were quite in her ear about like, this has to happen by this time, and this has to happen in this way. And so she said, we'll let you push for an hour and see how things go. Um, and then if in an hour you're still pushing and things aren't happening, we'll talk with the doctors and we'll like reassess with you then whether you would want an episiotomy or looking at other options. Um, and she also like called in the hospital midwife at that point, which was really lovely. So like I'd started working as a nurse a couple of years before that, and the hospital midwife had started as the midwife educator at the same time. So we were on the same orientation week. So this familiar face came in the room. I was like, oh, yay. So we had a nice little chat and carried on. Um, yeah, and I think at that point, like I did a lot of the pushing on my back, which I hadn't wanted to beforehand, but then when I was in labor, that was what felt most comfortable. And I didn't want to move. Yeah, I think I just didn't want to move because I was feeling really exhausted. Um, but my midwife did encourage me onto my side to, yeah, just obviously to help Bubba come out. And yeah, spent the rest of labor on my side. And then I re-looked at my notes and it was just over an hour later, I had Ash's head. And I remember him before his head came out. I think my midwife had said, I can see his head. I was like, can I feel it? Because I'd imagined touching his head. And so I reached down and I touched his head and I felt his hair. And I said, what does his hair look like? And my midwife said it was dark. I was like, ah, I was so close and I could just imagine this beautiful dark haired baby. And yeah, his head came out. That was quite excruciating. And I I don't remember her saying anything, but Tony did assure me that my midwife had like told me to slow down when I was birthing the head, but I was just done at that point and pushed really, really hard, um, with all my might. And his head was born, and then I remember the feeling of his body being born. It was just like birthing a jellyfish, like just slop, 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 um, which was a surreal feeling and quite cool. Um, and then, yeah, I think my midwife brought him up to my chest and I chatted with him and I was really stoked. And that part was very cool. I did
Mm, mm. Oh, yeah. Wow, go you.
love
And
it.
what size was he
Mm,
compared to, yeah, scan
yes, he
prediction?
was 5.1 kilos.
Big boy. What do you know what that is in pounds?
Yeah, 11 pounds, 5 ounces.
Mm. Mm.
He was chonky.
He was chunky.
Yeah.
And no, I mean, yeah, it was kind of hard hearing you say that you were told that they would give you an hour of pushing
Mm,
before they would review with you about an episiotomy or forceps or whatever next steps. Most first-time mums, it's accepted even in the medical arena um, that it's going to take up to 2 hours to give birth to your baby through the pushing phase. And so usually, there's always time limits put on in the hospital, often quite arbitrary ones. But yeah, the fact that you were given an hour before we're gonna, I just don't like that there's that pressure and that fear put in there, layered on top of all that you're going through in that moment. And it's something else I also noticed that you shared was about, that when his head was born, you were like, you wanted to feel it, and you said, so I was like, can I feel his head?
mm,
And it just speaks volumes about who feels that they own this experience, whose baby is this? Whose birth is this? Whose body is this? Um, and it,
mm.
and it sounds like when I hear you say those sorts of things, it sounds like the perception is that this is the hospital's, the staff's responsibility and it's their baby to look after. It's my birth is under their control and yeah, so I'm always so mindful of when I hear this language of pointing it out because I think when we hear these sorts of stories, when we hear this way of talking about birth, it just becomes internalized as that's how it is and that's normal and we subconsciously take on these beliefs, um, yeah,
Yeah,
that yeah that are unhelpful when it comes to positive and empowered birthing.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that, yeah, the asking, it was, yeah, when I was in hospital with my baby afterwards, like I didn't feel, I don't know if I felt like he was mine. I just felt like I had this stranger
Mm.
with me and I didn't really know what to do. And I was really hoping someone would come and tell me what to do. And yeah, like the asking to touch his head was a big part of that, of like, I don't know if I'm allowed to interfere with my own labor, but it's my labor.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I I was quite intentional about sharing that I asked because, yeah, that was a really important part of it was that I didn't feel like I had all the agency over my labor and I wasn't sure what I was allowed to do or not.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah,
Yes, and a beautiful piece to, I guess, illustrate the learning curve that you went on, knowing that your next birth was that empowering experience that, yeah, that you were denied in part with this first birth. Mm.
yes, yeah. And yeah, I think a good marker of that for my first birth was my midwife said, "You did amazing." And like I birthed a 5.1 kilo baby in hospital where doctors wanted to come and interfere and they didn't. And she said, "You did amazing." And I was like, felt mediocre. Like I didn't feel like I'd done a really good job. I felt like I'd been pretty sooky about it and
Wow.
weak, which I know is not true. But yeah, it was really hard to accept that compliment of doing a good job because I didn't feel that that was true.
Mm. Did you have any other interferences, interventions that occurred with your little, well, your big newborn because of his size? So, like, were they wanting to check his blood sugar levels? Was there pressures around feeding that, you perhaps, yeah, didn't have with your next baby? Yeah, anything you want to share about that?
Yes, so there was feeding was okay. Like I didn't feel pressure around that, but there was the expectation that I wasn't aware of beforehand that we would stay in hospital so his blood sugars could be monitored. Um, and I didn't, it was something I just didn't know about. Um, so I didn't, like, probably if I'd known about it, I would have declined and chosen to take him home. Um, or even just explored other options. Like, as a nurse, I know how to take blood sugars. Like, was there a machine I could have borrowed or something like that? Um, but yeah, at the time, I was just like, okay, we'll stay in hospital then. So that was, yeah, I would have changed that if I had known more. I
Mm.
mean, there's so much I would have changed if I'd known more, but that was one of the things. Like, I didn't want to stay in hospital away from Tony with our new baby. Um, yeah.
I think it's interesting, isn't it? And rather upsetting and frustrating, that these sort of blanket rules are applied to particular situations instead of looking at the big picture. Okay, so yeah, he's a big baby. But yeah, how was he feeding? How was the birth? If he'd had a really stressful birth experience, then that stress can add to the use of sugar in his blood to, it takes a lot of energy when we're stressed to activate our fight and flight system, uses energy, right? So, like, we look at the big picture, he had a really straightforward birth. And you said breastfeeding was going fine. So then they still insist on pricking her, yeah, I was going to say stabbing his little heel to get blood out of him, which is a really stressful procedure. I mean, it's sore. You know, when we stand on a drawing pin, it really hurts. And they're doing this regularly, and that's stressful. So that stress is utilizing some of his blood sugar that they're testing. And it's like, like his blood sugar levels would have been fine. He's a healthy boy. You are breastfeeding him well. You didn't have gestational diabetes, presumably, or you would have told us. So there's not the same issues as somebody who does have gestational diabetes, uncontrolled gestational diabetes, and that bigger baby situation is because of insulin. I won't go into the details, but it's understandable that in that situation you would check. You'd be more inclined to check the baby's blood sugar levels, but not when it's a healthy baby, and a healthy mum, and the situation doesn't indicate that there's any concern. Mm.
Yeah, yeah, yes. And yeah, when I was staying in hospital afterwards, I had a few nurses come into the room and they like had visible shock on their face that I was like little myself. And they're like, you had no diabetes. I'm like, no diabetes.
Yeah,
Are you what? It's like, yep, no, I just made a big baby and I birthed him.
yeah,
Um, and yeah, it, it was really funny. Like my friend knows a midwife and she even heard through her friend who's a midwife about this woman who just had a massive baby. Like the whole maternity unit was talking about it, not neonate, sorry. The like
pediatrics.
postnatal stay.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were all talking about this woman who gave birth to a giant baby. It's like, that's me. But yeah, they couldn't believe that that was actually possible. And I think, man, if they went to some home births, they'd be quite shocked at what's possible for a woman's body. And yeah, that our bodies are made to open and have babies.
Yeah. And if we're a healthy woman growing a healthy baby, why would we make a baby that's too big to, to birth?
Mm.
Like it doesn't make sense. Of course, there are always these rare exceptions where we do need medical interventions and that birth wouldn't have safe or positive outcomes without those interventions. But we're talking as a minute fraction of the birthing population. So when you've got a well mother who hasn't had any, concerns during her pregnancy, why do we pathologize big babies or small babies for that matter, or yeah, we we needlessly put fear into parents and create problems where there are none.
Yeah.
And then women are left with the story of I was just as well. I was in the hospital, like not realizing that it's the interventions that they had in the first place that caused the problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
I
And
think
I
a
heard,
prime, I want to share, Georgia, that I think a prime example of this, it's just sort of so blatantly obvious and clear when you really understand birthing physiology and you understand the the very real impacts of particular interventions, is that a lot of women are being encouraged, and I would say pressured into uh, inducing their labor when they are perceived to have a big baby. And it seems that a lot of women these days are having these growth scans near the end of their pregnancy, are being told baby is big, are being told we want to induce if you get to like 40 weeks or whatever, we want to induce you because baby is only going to get bigger and we're concerned that baby will get stuck, baby will have shoulder dystocia, right? So let's induce your labor so that baby doesn't grow any bigger and we're less likely to have those problems. Well, when you're induced, chances are you're going to end up with an epidural, birthing on your back. You're not able to feel the pushing urge in the same way. So and the position being on your back tucks your tailbone up, reduces your pelvic outlet, so there's less space for baby to get out. When you're on, when you're not mobile and you're on your back, lying down, you baby doesn't have gravity on its side to help it get into a good position. So, and then you're not feeling the urges to push. So, pushing is a bit different, and that's all kind of guided or like what's the word I'm looking for? Coached, that coached pushing that needs to kind of happen with an epidural on board. So, babies getting pushed out sometimes when they're not quite in the right position or um, and and the mother's pelvis isn't as open, and so babies get stuck.
mm,
Like so we want you to be induced to stop the baby getting stuck, getting too big and getting stuck, and then the induction itself causes the baby to get stuck. And women aren't then left with the message of, oh, like I shouldn't have had that induction. Baby might not have gotten stuck. They are left with the belief, oh, thank goodness I was induced. Baby would have been bigger and would have been even more disastrous because they're not
yeah.
told. They're not led to that understanding or, yeah, around the impacts of induction of labor. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was something I was quite grateful for was the obstetrician I was talking to, or one of them was aware of the evidence that induction is not helpful for big babies with no other indication for it. So
Wow. Excellent.
that was a relief. Um, but it was really interesting, like just that belief that babies won't fit out. So Asher was born with his fist by his head.
Wow.
So big baby already and a nuchal hand. Yeah, I heard of a story like after I'd had Asher where a baby was presenting with both hands up by its head, and this doctor had said, we a baby can't be born like that. A baby couldn't even be born with one hand up by its head. I was like, that's not true. It's not true. And yeah, it was very hard to hold my tongue in that situation. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, it just, if only he knew, like, I wish I could tell him, like, what was possible in the absence of interventions. And yeah, this baby potentially couldn't have been born with both hands by the head because of the interventions that had already been taking place. Um, yeah, so
Yeah, Georgia, that reminds me of a story of a woman who I worked with who had had a traumatic first birth experience that ended in a forceps delivery. Um, and she was told that the complications were because her baby was too big for her, and that any future babies would need to be born by cesarean, right? And I was like, that is ridiculous. She was told your pelvis is too small to fit big babies through. How did that baby get out of her? And it didn't, that baby wasn't born by cesarean. That baby came through her pelvis along with forceps, so it had the additional uh, yeah, size of the forceps up around the baby's head being pulled through her pelvis. And I have now been in this role long enough to hear many stories of women who were led to believe that they were too small to birth a big baby, and then went on to have birth an even bigger baby perfectly, naturally at home or yeah, in their power.
yeah,
I'm interested to hear, Georgia, did you tear with?
I did. Yeah, I had a second degree tear with him, which I would attribute mostly to my frantic pushing at the end where I just wanted it to be done. And where I was feeling pressure as well to have it done. Like I was very aware of time restraints. And I was over it. And so I was just like, yep, I'm just gonna push hard out. And yeah, yeah.
Did you have your tear sutured? How was that healing process for you?
Yeah, gnarly. Not as gnarly as it could have been, but I did have it sutured, and I that was one of my least favorite parts is like just having fingers on and in me straight after delivering a baby. It's like I just want to be with my baby, and like I was grateful for the timing because I I had said I want my baby to be given time to crawl to the breast and find it himself. So we had a beautiful time, like just a whole, he latched just after an hour, and I don't think anything was done to me or happened to me in that hour. There was just like my midwife cleaning up and chatting to the other midwife, which was really lovely to listen to because they both were passionate about home birth. So they were just chatting about home birth. Um, and yeah, while that was happening, I was just watching Asher crawl to the breast,
Yeah,
and
so he did the breast crawl.
he did. He did.
Awesome.
So that was very cool.
Yeah.
And then I wasn't getting any cramps to birth my placenta, and so we were waiting on that as well. And so after Asher had had his feed, I got up and tried going to the toilet. Like I tried pushing and nothing was happening. I tried going to the toilet and I couldn't wee. Um, and so I think by around 2 hours, I was offered oxytocin and I said, yes, please. Like, I just want this done. I'm over it. Um, and so I was catheterized, which drained like half a liter of urine. So I think my urethra was just quite paralyzed from probably me pushing a giant baby out. Um, very, yeah, very quickly and not giving that time. Um, and yeah, so drained all that urine and then birth, like, yeah, had a managed third stage and then was checked after that for tears. And so during that time, Tony was holding Asher, um, and I got checked and I asked for gas because it was horrible, and I asked for Asher back on me because I wanted the comfort of him on my chest. So I lay with him on my chest, huffing on gas and a bit high because I'm a lightweight, just yabbering on about my sister's infected wound from several years ago,
Mm,
while I was having my stitches done. But yeah, the anesthetic was the worst part. Once the anesthetic was in, it was better. But yeah, it was so sore afterwards, and I didn't realize how much of that was probably from the suturing. Um, so like for weeks I would be using a water bottle to squirt while I was weeing.
mm,
Um, and then after I had my second baby, I had a first degree, like a tiny, tiny little tear with him. But it was so comfortable weeing. It's like, oh, it doesn't have to be really gnarly.
mm.
Um, so yeah, I didn't know at the time that it was painful for that reason, but afterwards I realized like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah. Talk us through your postpartum experience with Asher. How were the early weeks and months that followed?
So that first night, like I was in hospital alone with him, um, and it was really interesting because, like, on the one hand, I felt like I was with this stranger, but who I also really loved really intensely, um, and those emotions were quite overwhelming.
Mm,
But I also like I felt the closest with God that I'd ever been in my life. Like I felt like just this channel was open from heaven to me, and like yeah, everything was just yeah, like I was just in communion with him that whole stay. So that was really, really beautiful and very comforting for me. Um, and yeah, I really wanted Tony there, but he couldn't be there. So yeah, that first night was weird, but really beautiful in some ways. And then the next day, like I got my catheter out the next morning. I'd asked to keep it in because I just was too tired to mobilize to the toilet. And I was like, well, this is convenient. Um, and so, yeah, the next day got that out, drank as much water as I could to prove that I could pee enough to go home. Um, and Tony picked me up that afternoon. They wheeled me down to the car park with my baby, and we just put him in his capsule in the car park, which felt really weird and kind of unceremonious. Um, and then yeah, we came home and Tony said that I should take a nap, but I didn't want to because I didn't want to not be watching my baby. And I do feel like because Tony had been sent home and I hadn't had him with me that whole time, I felt like there was a disconnect where it was me and my baby who I had to protect, and he might not know how to do it right, even though I didn't know how to do it right because I just felt like I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't have much to do with babies before I had my own baby. So like I changed one nappy on a baby in NICU one night when I'd done a shift there, but that was it.
mm,
So I yeah, I didn't feel empowered in my kind of early motherhood to even know what I was doing. But I still felt like Tony knew less. So
mhm,
I felt quite protective in that way, which sucked.
mm,
Um, but I did have a nap and Tony looked after Asher and they were both fine. Um, and yeah, that so I'd had the first night in hospital and then the second night at home, and I'm sure I'd been told, but I completely forgot that the second night can be extremely wakeful. And
with
so that,
baby wanting to continuously feed to try and bring you milk in. Yeah.
yes,
Mm,
yes. And we had him in a Moses basket by the bed. So, like every time he was waking up, I was swinging my legs out, pulling him back in. He was quite heavy. I was quite sore. And I remember it was 7 a.m. the next morning, and I just set him down, and then he cried again, and I just burst into tears. And Tony sat up and he saw me just like sobbing on the side of the bed. And so for him, that was a sign that he needed to protect me
mm,
from this relentless. needy little person.
Mm.
Um, and so that kind of turned into Tony not being as willing to bring him to me when he needed a feed because he wanted me to rest,
Mm.
which I so understand. Um, but yeah, neither of us were fully prepared to surrender to how relentless and needy babies are and
Mm.
are supposed to be.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, it became a thing where like Tony would become quite panicky when Asher was really needy. He started going for runs at like 11 o'clock at night in the pouring rain, and I was scared for him because like anything could happen. Nothing did happen, but you know, that's scary in itself. And I remember those early weeks, the nights felt really dark, like quite spiritually dark. And
Mm.
then I'd just wait for the sun to come through the curtains every morning. I'd be like waiting and watching. And
Mm.
by around 5 and 6 o'clock, I was like, yes, we're so close. Um, and we're still in lockdown, so we're still not seeing people. But mum would ring every morning at 9 a.m. and I'd look forward to that because that was like I'd made it through the night and reached safety. Um,
Sounds really hard, Georgia.
yeah, yeah, it was quite dark, and Tony's anxiety turned into what we didn't realize at the time, but later recognized as panic attacks where
Mm.
he'd just shut down. Um, and he described it later like he just wanted to run away, but he's very practical. So he's like, well, where am I going to run to? Like, what happens if I run 100 kilometers? Then what? Like, what am I going to do at the other end of it? So yeah, he stuck around. But
Mm.
um, yeah, there was that panic for him a
Mm.
lot of the time.
Mm. Yeah, I do wonder how much goes unspoken but felt by the men um, in these challenging early months. Our society, our Western culture does an atrocious job of supporting new families, and you really are chucked in the deep end as a couple, and there's a lot of damage to couples' relationships um, going through this stressful time and not having the tools or understandings to be able to communicate what's going on or to get the support you need to help manage whatever's going on or to, like you said, you didn't know what was kind of normal, was to be expected because we're not growing up, in a tribal situation where we're seeing other newborns all the time or helping yeah helping raise
Mhm.
little ones. How did you find out that he was having these panic attacks, that this is what was going on for him, and how was that managed or yeah um healed if it was healed?
I think I started asking questions when he was, well, first I started recognizing like if he's behaving this way, like if he's starting to shut down, I need to not be like, what's going on? Like I needed to back off and give him space to feel what he was feeling rather than trying to dissect it and rescue him from it. Um, so that was, I guess, the first step. And then when he was feeling okay, asking him questions about, okay, what is going on when you're feeling like this? And I don't know at what point it was we realized that it was panic attacks, but I think there was a point where I asked enough questions, yeah, I'm not
Mm.
actually sure what it was, but
Mm.
just realized like, oh, that's what that is. It just doesn't look like the shortness of breath or the racing heart that we would expect. Um, yeah, it was like he imploded.
Yeah.
Um, and at some point, I can't remember when, he started taking like a St. John's wort, 5-HTP. There were a couple of other things, a supplement, and that helped. And later on, we drew the connection like, oh, you were depressed. Um, that's, yeah, he was feeling better with those. And before that, he, yeah, he was just in this really dark place. Um, and so he stayed on those for quite some time. And it wasn't until I was pregnant with our second baby that he stopped those. He tried stopping them a few times and he'd just be really horrible and grumpy. I was like, what's going on? He's like, oh, I tried stopping again. Um, but yeah, when I was pregnant with a second baby, he stopped and stuff got lighter. And yeah, yeah, he
Mm.
was ready for that by then.
Right. Yeah. Talk us through your next pregnancy and birth experience, Georgia.
Mm.
Mm.
So 6 months postpartum with Asher, I was like, I want another baby. And Tony's like, no way. Um, and so we talked then about like, okay, what would an okay age gap look like? And Tony said 2 years. Like if we get pregnant partway into Asher's, like after he turns 1, then yeah, by the time he's 2, we'll be having a baby and that'll be cool. And as we drew closer to that, Tony was not ready, which was okay. And then he said 1 month, like, I am ready, let's try. And we didn't get pregnant, and he was so relieved. And he was like, actually, I'm not ready. And I was really angry and really, I just couldn't see his perspective either. I was like, we should be welcoming of babies. We should love children. And there were all of these shoulds
Right.
that I believed he should be feeling. Um, and I talked to a lot of women around that time as well, like, because I was so upset all the time. Like, people would be like, how are you? I'm like, it's not good. I want another baby. And they're like, well, what's your rush? And I was like, that's not what you're meant to say. Like, you're meant to say, of course you should have another baby. So, yeah, eventually we sought out a couple who we had some mentoring with, and we went to them the first night and like explained where we were at, and they just turned to me and they said, okay, Georgia, can you submit to Tony in this? Can you like honor what he needs and honor that he probably is trying to protect you guys as well? Um, and can you trust him to make that decision for when you're ready? I was like, this is not what we came for. Like, you're meant to tell him he should have another baby. But that was a really big switch for me to trusting that Tony can make wise decisions too. And so I did, and that was a big weight off too. Like I wasn't trying to convince him anymore. Um, we were like united, even if I didn't feel the same feelings he was having, we were united as a couple in what we were doing. And so that was really beautiful. And then it would have, it was probably only a few months later that he was like, okay, I'm ready to try again. It's like, are you sure? Please be sure. Um, and yeah, so we tried again and became pregnant again, and he was okay.
Mm.
Like, and we'd talked as well, like about what what kind of response I would expect telling him I was pregnant, because he's like, I'm not going to be over the moon. I'm I'm still scared. I
Mm.
still, yeah, I still don't feel 100% ready. But
Mm.
yeah, if you can give me the space to react how I need to react. And I said, yeah, I can do that. But please, like, even a small positive response, like, cool. Like,
Mm.
I didn't need a big, overwhelming celebration, but I just needed him to be like, yeah, that's okay.
Mm.
And it was exactly like that. Like,
Mm.
I think he was asking me how much chicken I wanted for dinner. And I said, oh, well, maybe 2 serves would be good because I'm eating for 2. And he's like, oh, okay, cool.
Mm.
And that was what my heart needed.
Mm.
And that was what was safe for him. So
Mm.
yeah,
Mm.
yeah. It was an interesting journey, and yeah, yeah, not what I kind of had originally hoped for, but I think that was really important in our journey too, of like me trusting him as well as him trusting me.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that piece of your story. I think it's a powerful one, and I think that it will be um, a good guide for other listeners, perhaps around their own experiences and ways that they might like to, yeah, work through things or shift their perspective around things. So thank you. Mm.
Mm. Yeah, I think there's a lot of like expectation around how people should react or feel. And I definitely felt like that. Like I'd see videos of people telling their spouses that they were pregnant and they would cry and they were over the moon. And like, I mean, Tony's just not like that anyway. He's quite like a quiet processor anyway. So learning to see the beauty in that has been a thing.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, just that expectation shift was really important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Um, yeah. Also, a big part of his fear came from when I was around 3 months postpartum and I felt like I went crazy. Like I didn't realize at the time, but my period was starting to return. Um, and so I just yeah, one day I had like this panic attack sort of thing, and Tony was suggesting ways to cope with it. He's like, maybe you need to go for a run, which is insane looking back. I shouldn't have been running anyway, that early postpartum, but he's like, maybe you could go for a run. And when I would think of going for a run, I would think of all the ways that I would hurt myself running. He's like, maybe you should go for a nap. And when I thought about going for a nap, I would think of the ways that I would hurt myself even there. And that was really scary because I'd never had thoughts like that before.
Mm.
Um, and so we went to ED because I was like, I feel like I'm having something of a mental health crisis. Like, yeah, to me, it felt bad and scary.
Mm.
So we went to the hospital and saw the mental health team, and they're like, you're doing really well.
Mm.
Um, yeah, you're doing
Yeah.
great. So you can go home. And I was just like, I came here for help because I didn't know what else to do and I was scared.
Mm.
Um, and I did, like, I walked alongside a couple of women following that because I had really intense rage following on from there as well, particularly around my cycles. Um, but yeah, like I had thoughts of throwing my baby and
Mhm.
like I was hitting walls and trying to, like, I was banging my head against the wall because I felt like I needed to get the rage out somehow. But I also didn't want to break stuff because that would be really annoying. But like I had my phone in my hand one day and I tried to call Tony and he hadn't picked up. So I just threw my phone at the floor and the screen shattered or the
Mm.
back shattered. Um, which like it's an expensive object to be throwing. So that led into a lot of Tony's fear of what will happen if we have a second baby. That was
Yeah.
a really important detail I missed earlier. Um,
Mm.
yeah, that was that was a big part of his reluctance and his protectiveness as well, of like, I don't want you to go through that again. That was awful.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, by the time we did get pregnant, I'd worked through a lot of that and felt a lot more safe. Um, but yeah, that was a big fear for him and for me too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
Um, yeah. So the first few months of pregnancy were probably a bit easier than the first time. Like the first time I was working full-time shifts, and this time I was at home with my baby, and Ash was so lovely. Like I'd be sitting there crying on the couch because I was just feeling a lot of feelings, and he'd come up and go, "Do you want a tissue?" Like
Ah.
he'd really, really good at speaking. So he'd come up and he'd climb up on the chair and get me a tissue and come over and give me a cuddle. So that was really beautiful. Um, and then around, I think I was around 9-ish weeks, Tony went overseas for a few weeks. And so I was home with my sister-in-law, who also, she found out she was pregnant while her husband was away on the same trip. So that was really sweet. Like we were both home with our toddlers and our tiny little puku babies. And
Mm.
that was a really sweet time. And it was then, like while Tony was overseas, that he stopped taking the supplements and felt okay. And then when he came back, he said, I can feel happier than I could feel when I was taking them, and also sadder and more angry. Like he could feel more of a spectrum of emotions, which we didn't expect because it was a natural, like antidepressant type supplement.
Yeah.
We didn't expect it to have the same effect as an SSRI.
Hmm.
So that was really interesting.
Yeah, that is.
Um, but yeah, around it was around that time, like early in my pregnancy, I think when Tony was away, that I was speaking to an older couple from our church about how I was feeling about Tony processing it and my fears that he wasn't going to be healed enough by the time our baby was born. Um, and as I was speaking to them, I just heard the words in my mind like peace, joy, and hope. Um, and I, yeah, I clung on to them. I wrote them down. Um, and then, yeah, I went on quite a journey through pregnancy where like Tony had a couple more panic attacks and I was like, well, like, God, you told me to have this hope. What's happening? Like, I didn't believe that Tony was healing. Um, and towards the end of my pregnancy, I reached out to you and asked for advice on like therapy for him. And so you gave us a few options, and he ended up reaching out to a local counselor and had some sessions with him, just working through some of what he had experienced and his fears. And he was given some coping techniques, which he started using, and they helped. Um, so that was really big.
Awesome.
Um, yeah.
Mm.
And yeah, in terms of like preparing for birth and postpartum, I knew I was going to have a home birth this time. Um, and I had the same midwife, which was beautiful because she knew my story. She'd seen me birth this chunk of a baby. Um, and I think she'd reached a really cool point in her practice where, or she just, I felt like she presented options more as options. Like when she presented them in my first pregnancy, I took them as like, this is what we have to do. Whereas the second time around, she's said, do you want to do fundal measurements or not? And I said, well, you've got your hands on my belly every month. You'll be able to feel if something's off. I don't want them.
Mm.
Um, and also really early in my pregnancy, around 10 weeks, I felt my baby move. And I knew it was a movement because it felt the same as Asher, and I was in a position like I was on my hands and knees, and I just felt him go bloop
Yeah.
against the front of my belly. I was like, what? Like, this is so early. And I told my midwife, and she's like, yeah, that can happen. Like, you can feel it that early. Um,
Mm.
and then at 11 weeks, we tried listening for his heartbeat and couldn't hear anything. And so my midwife said, do you want to come back next week, and we'll listen again, or would you like to be referred for a scan? And at that stage, I was like, no, I felt him move last week. I didn't know it was a him. I felt baby. Actually, I was adamant it was a she. Um, I that was a bit funny. But I had felt this baby move last week. I knew that there was a baby there. And so I wanted to wait until the next week, come back and try again. But then after I left the appointment, I just felt really fearful and asked for a scan. And sure, like went to the scan. There was a healthy baby right there, which I knew. Um, but I think that was a really cool point of reminding myself, like, you can trust this process and you can trust what you feel. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So then yeah, we chose to have an anatomy scan at 20 weeks because we wanted to know if it was a boy or a girl. We didn't find out with Asher, because I didn't want to know, but Tony was keen. So we agreed like first time we wouldn't, second time we would. So we found out we were having a baby boy and named him like that afternoon. Um, and yeah, yes, yeah. And then, yeah, as we kind of drew closer to the end of pregnancy, like Tony was doing counseling, um, I was doing a lot of work preparing for postpartum and putting a lot of effort into like learning what was normal newborn sleep. Um, we set up, you can see it in the background there, that sidecar cot, which we still have. So I didn't have to swing my legs out of bed and pick up a baby in the night. I could just literally roll over and here's a boob.
Yeah.
And we're still doing that, which is great.
Mm.
Um, so things like that, like I just prepared everything that I could to make it as easy as possible. And Tony was great at just trusting that I would know what I needed. He's like, yeah, I don't see a need for it, but if you feel like you need it, then I trust you in that. And I think especially with the sidecar cot situation, he was a bit dubious, but later he like, no, this is amazing. Like so much better. Um,
Can I ask what resources you drew on, or people, or
mm,
to set yourself up for that postpartum, like to learn those things?
Dr. Heather Johnston, her business is called Cradled. I bought her newborn sleep like seminar recording, where she talks about what's normal, what are some red flags, and how can you support normal infant sleep. So she was an amazing resource. Um, I bought a chest sleeping guide. I think it was from Co Sleepy. Um, and that was just like a resource to read through and learn how to safely sleep with a baby on my chest. Um, which a friend had told me she had done with her second baby. I was like, that's so unsafe. Like I didn't realize there were safe ways to do that. Um, so I learned that, talked to Tony through it so that if we chose to do that, he knew what we were doing. Um, and then yeah, Rachel Reed's book was that was the most game-changing book that I could have read. I read it, we'd gone away for a weekend. My son stayed with my parents and we stayed in this cute little like shed type thing with concrete floors, which just felt really good. Um, and I just spent that whole weekend just reading this book and be like, Tony, this makes sense. Like, this is why I felt this way last time. And like, yeah, I was so excited just to know what I wanted to do differently and just to trust the process of birth, like truly trust it, um, and know what I needed to support myself in that. And even considering like who am I going to have in my birth space? Like I felt really lonely in my first labor, because I am quite, I'm getting more introverted now, but I'm still quite a social person where I want people around me to feel safe. And so considering who I was going to have in my birth space was really important. Um, and yeah, I was quite clear on that. Like I wrote a birth map with this is what I want if I'm having a home birth. If this happens, then this is what I want. And if this happens, this is, I don't know what I want, but I want to discuss these things. Um,
Beautiful, Georgia.
yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
And I printed one out for every single possible person on my birth team too, like
Perfect.
one for the second midwife, one for hospital staff if we go there. And they were all slightly different and tweaked to what each person would need to know.
Great.
Yeah.
Mm.
Whereas my birth plan the first time round was I want to listen to music and I want to, yeah, it was just very like surface level comfort measure type things rather than this is how I want to be treated.
Mm.
Um, so one
Mm.
of the things I was quite big on in my birth map was I don't want to be told what to do. I don't want to be told what sounds to make. or how to move, unless, like I said, that's where I'm at. And also, I trust, like this was to my midwives, like I trust you to tell me if you think moving in a certain way would be beneficial.
Mm.
And that did come into play at the end of my labor, which I'll get to. But
Mm.
yeah, I trusted what that I would know what I needed, and I also trusted my midwife to recognize if she thought something was going to be beneficial, and that relationship was really important to me.
Mm. Mm.
Yeah. Um, yeah.
Did you feel like you were as big as you were with Asher this pregnancy?
I
And
felt a little bit smaller.
oh, did
Um,
you? Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, like my bump was just a bit more tucked away. Like with Asher, I joked that I looked like a truck. I felt like a truck. And I don't really have many photos of my pregnancy with him. I took heaps early on because I was like playing a funny little game of is it baby or is it bloat? But then once it became obvious, I just stopped taking photos. And it was, yeah. And then because I was going to use them for a baby shower game and then I completely forgot.
Right.
But yeah, I have one photo when I was 36 weeks pregnant, I think, and I just like was just like a ball with these little legs at the bottom. Um,
Which pregnancy is it that you shared the photo of you on the beach
that
pregnant?
was Jordan's pregnancy.
Okay, your second pregnancy, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, because I was thinking you didn't look particularly big.
No,
Either
and that
time. I
was
mean,
I
you
was
know, around.
35 weeks there, I think.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, quite yeah, he was a lot more tucked away. Um, and even so, like leading up to birth, I became really tired. Like I just wanted to sleep a lot and I didn't want to leave the house, which felt really good to lean into because I could, because I wasn't working. Um, and so for the most part, I stuck to what felt really good. Um, and I
I think,
did go out, I think it was at 39 weeks, I went out to a kind of day camp, which I didn't want to go to, but I felt really vulnerable. And I did feel like I knew I wanted women around me praying for me, but I didn't want to go. And Tony was like, I think you should go. Like, I think it'll be really good. And I did go, and it was towards the end of the day, and we, like, the kind of event was wrapping up, and I was like, no one's prayed for me. I need that. And so I was starting to feel a bit shaky. And then a woman stood up and she said, I feel like there's someone here who really needs prayer. And I burst into tears and immediately like five women were around me. It's like, oh, wow. And yeah, so that was really beautiful. And they spoke into fears that I didn't even have words for. Um, and yeah, it was a beautiful kind of release and surrender. And yeah, I went home. I was like, Tony, you were right. That was really good. Um, but yeah, apart from that, I mostly stuck to home. And then on a Friday evening, there was this gala thing that a local school was running. And I was like, oh, it'll be cool to go out to. I don't really feel like it. I was really stroppy with people. Um, but I went to this thing and I ran into so many people I knew, and they're like, you don't even look that big. And I was like, well, yeah, I'm 40 weeks and 3 days or whatever it was. Um, like I'm pretty pregnant and it was so hot and yuck. And I could feel just a bit of kind of regular cramping, and I was like, I bet I'll have a baby tomorrow. Um, and I bought a cute little outfit from one of the stalls and talked to more people that I didn't really feel like talking to about how big or small or whatever it was they thought I was. Um, and then we're driving home and I was just still feeling crampy and I I wanted food and I wanted a really wholesome meal, but we didn't really have time for that, so we just got pizza. And I sat in the car because I was like, I don't want to go and see more people. Um, and came home and had some pizza and went to bed. And oh, earlier in the week too, I'd had a night of contractions, but they were really gentle and beautiful
Mhm.
and like really pleasurable. I was like, oh my goodness, I'm going to have an orgasmic birth. I was so excited. And then I woke up and they stopped, which I was okay with because I knew like labor isn't just this one time event. Um, but yeah, so I'd had those earlier in the week, and then that Friday night I had a wonderful sleep, slept all the way through the night, and I woke up at 6:30 having contractions I was breathing through. Um, and I wanted to let Tony sleep as long as he could. And through my pregnancy, I'd talked with my 2.5-year-old at the time and talked about the noises he could expect to hear and the movements I might make. And like we'd practice roaring and bellowing like cows and lions and um, all of that kind of thing. So yeah, I stayed in the living room for a while by myself, just sitting on a Swiss ball. I was arranging for flowers to be sent to someone that like someone had had a really crappy day the day before. So I really wanted to have flowers sent to her, and the florist I was trying to get into didn't open till 9 a.m. It's like, I just have a feeling I'll be busy at 9 a.m. So I spent a good chunk of time that morning between contractions sending a really detailed message to my friend to organize flowers for my other friend. And
Beautiful.
um, yeah, that took up a lot of time.
Mm.
By the time I'd finished that, I was moaning through contractions. And so I just went for a walk around the living room, just like it. I'd watched a birth video. Jerusha Sutton had taken it, I think, and shared it on her Instagram. And it was this Māori woman in Australia, and she had stomped around the deck with her support team. And I just saw her in my mind, and I stomped around the living room, and it felt so good. Um, and yeah, by the time I'd finished my stomping, I was like, I think it's time to wake Tony up. It was 7:45 by that point. So I went in and I said, hey, I'm in labor. We're going to have a baby soon. Um, and then I heard my son wake up, so I went into his room and I said, "Good morning, buddy. I'm in labor. I'm going to have a baby." And then I dropped to all fours and was like, "Oh!" And he's like, "Okay." And reminded him like we've talked about these noises. I'm safe,
Mm.
and I'm going to have a baby really soon. And Tony got up and got him breakfast. And by then I was in hard labor. Like I went to my room, I pulled out, I'd had one of the um waterproof mats tucked up by my bed, and I pulled that out onto the floor and I just labored there. Tony came back and I said, I need to brush my teeth, but I can't get to the bathroom. So he brought back a bowl and my toothbrush and I brushed my teeth. Um, and I didn't want to like breathe gross air into anyone's face. And then, so what time was that? I think it was around, it might have been around 20 past 8, but I was like, look, I don't need to wait for an hour of these contractions.
Mm.
I need my birth team here now. And I had toyed with the idea because I loved laboring by myself like that. It felt really safe. So I toyed with like, maybe I'll just free birth.
Mm.
Um, and ultimately decided not to because I knew I wanted photos. I knew I actually did want my midwife there, and I wanted my sister-in-law there as Ash's support person
Mm.
because she was would arranged that she would care for him, and if he needed to go, she would take him. Um, so we called in my team, and every phone call Tony made, he'd be like, "Yeah, so George is in labor," and then I'd roar in the background. They're like, "Okay, we're coming now." Um, so they all came, and they would have arrived. Yeah, they arrived pretty quickly, which was good.
Mhm.
Um, and not long after they got there, I said, "Oh, actually, my contractions, so they hurt, but I welcomed it, and I moved instinctively, and like in the photos, I love them because I look like an animal." And I just thought back to that mammalian birth podcast that you did. Um, and yeah, just that wild, raw, like listening to my body, and I could feel my baby descending. And I was telling people what was happening, which was really cool to be like, his head's moved down, like every movement I felt and I knew what was happening. And it was just so intuitive and so powerful and so painful. Um, but it's so good.
Yeah.
Um,
It's interesting,
and
eh? When we change our perspective on the pain to not one of being fearful of the pain, but rather like this is a normal, healthy part where you can actually go, I welcome the pain because it's bringing my baby closer to my arms. It shifts your also how you feel the pain. So yeah, it's painful. It really sucks. It's hard and it's intense, but it's also good. Like yeah, and I'm
yes,
doing this and it feels powerful. It doesn't feel scary.
yes, yes. And that I'm doing it like I had one moment where I was like, I can't do this. And I think I breathed it out loud. And then I was like, no, I can and I am.
Yes.
And that point of like taking ownership of it, it's like, this is happening to, like, it's happening whether I want it to or not. But I do want it to. And feeling the pressure against like the bottom of my body, is like, wow, this is so close.
Yeah.
And my mum had had a very speedy second labor. So I had expected, I'd kind of, yeah, I'd expected it in a way. I just kind of knew that that would be the way things went. And so when I was in labor, I was thinking, this is safe. This is happening really fast, and that's okay.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, not long after that, I looked up at my midwife and I said, I need to go to the toilet. I can't remember if I said I need a poo or not, but I think, yeah, I said, I need a poo.
Mm.
And I knew it was going to be a poo or a baby. And
Or both.
so, or both. So I hopped up and I went to the loo and I did a wee. I think I had a contraction coming and I stood up because that felt right. And I the next contraction after I stood up, my baby's head was out.
Wow.
And I'd had a dream earlier in my pregnancy about having his head between my legs and feeling his head and talking to him. And I did, like, I was standing there with his head in my hands going, hi, baby, hi, baby.
Mm.
And at this point, everyone's crammed into the bathroom, like half the half the room was standing in the bath, which was empty. Um, my son was in the bath and he was watching. He knew what was happening. He'd come in when I was still on the toilet. So I did have a few contractions on the toilet because he came in at that point and he held my hand. Um, and so we have this beautiful t photo of Tony holding me on the side and my son just right in front of me holding my hand while I was having contractions. And he wasn't scared. He was just comforting me. Um, yeah, and then half the team hopped in the bath and I was standing up with my baby's head between my legs, and there was quite a pause then, and the midwives suggested getting down on my hands and knees. And I did that, and it was easy. Like moving had felt like this huge ordeal in my first labor, but I guess I wasn't very tired. I'd only just started laboring, really. So I hopped down onto my hands and knees and waited and put my head down on the ground at their suggestion. And then I had this huge contraction and roared my baby out onto the floor. And I love listening to the video. I could have that soundtrack on repeat for the rest of my life because he's born and I'm like, hi, baby, hi, Bubba. And then Tony goes, oh, Georgia. And Asher just goes, baby Jordan's out.
Aw.
And it was like, those were the first words that he heard when he was born. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
it was what it should have been.
Mm.
And Tony doesn't cry. And and I didn't know he'd cried, but we were looking through the photos when they came back, and there's this photo of him grinning, and he's like, "Oh yeah, I cried a little bit there." And I look, and there's this tear in his eye. I'm like, what? Like, this baby that he'd felt so unsure about conceiving, um, and the situation he'd felt so unsure about entering, and he was crying and he was elated to meet our baby. And that, yeah, that's everything.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So
Mm.
beautiful. And yeah, what was your postpartum experience like? I mean, it's always going to be different because it's this
Mm.
time and because you've got a toddler that you're also looking after. But is there anything you want to share that was kind of different about the two experiences, perhaps that you put down to that experience of birth and that preparation that you did?
Mm. Yeah, it was completely different. It was like truly one of the best seasons of my life. Um, yeah, like night and day in the truest sense of like there was that darkness the first time where we loved this baby, and also it was really scary and intense and dark. And this time we loved this baby and we loved our toddler. And I loved also that Asher was part of it, that he was part of this healing experience, because I didn't want it to be like Asher's birth was bad and Jordan's was good. I felt like Jordan's birth was Asher's as well. Like he was, yeah, he got to watch and he got to see his brother. And I asked him this morning, I was like, oh, what did you think of, like, we talk about the birth a lot even still, but I was like, oh, what was Jordan's birth like? He's like, yeah, it was good. It was funny. And I was in the bath. So he had really cool memories of that time too, um, which I think to helped him to process becoming a brother. And like it wasn't a big thing. It was just like, yeah, here's our baby. Um, yeah. One of the things, like, I guess immediately postpartum, I had really hoped to birth my own placenta, and I'd done a lot of reading and like I bought Sarah Wickham's book, Birthing Your Placenta, and so I'd learned just in detail about that process. And in the end, I felt really faint not long after I gave birth to Jordan, which I'd felt faint with Asher too. Um, and I was having strong contractions to bring my placenta down, but I don't know if it was just that I couldn't let go, or if it was just, I don't know what it was, but it just wasn't happening. And after about an hour, I said, no, I do want oxytocin. Um, and my midwife wiped my leg. I was like, no, I don't want it. And so she backed off. And then 5 minutes later, I'm like, no, I do want it. Please, please administer it. And so she did. And my placenta was born, and we put it into this clay vessel that I'd made for it.
Mm.
Um, and I'd I'd thought that if I couldn't birth my placenta myself, I'd be disappointed, and it would also, like, I know synthetic oxytocin can disrupt natural oxytocin. Um, so I was concerned about that, but I think like the power of that birth and the control of it being completely my choice, which it was the first time too. I had asked for it that time too, but it just felt really different, and I was so okay with that. So yeah, that even that I think played into my postpartum of like it went the way it should have. Um, yeah, and Jordan had a really wakeful second night, and it was fine. And
Mm.
every wake, I'd lie there feeding him, and I'm like, this is okay. I'm still happy.
Mm.
Um, and that's kind of how that whole postpartum felt, was just it was joyful and peaceful, and that hope had been fulfilled.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. And Tony was okay. And that's been the biggest blessing, is that he's been okay and I've been okay. And like my periods have returned a lot later because I didn't like try and force my baby not to need me in the night.
Mm.
Because that was also a big part of our first postpartum, was just listening to all of these external expectations and denying physiological needs. Um, and so I would we worked really hard on getting Asher to sleep independently in the cot, and we did try leaving him to cry it out once, and I was like, this is not okay. So from there, we'd always be with him. But there was a big part of my rage too, was that he wasn't falling asleep in the way he was supposed to. And so I threw my glasses at the wall one time, and I'm pretty blind. I need those to see. Um, so the second time round, acknowledging that Jordan has a need for us, and that's okay, and that's good and healthy, that shaped that whole journey
Mm.
of letting him be a baby and not
Kind of,
expecting ridiculous things.
it's kind of it's similar to that what we were just talking about before about the pain, right? You shift your perception of what something is like meant to look like or feel like or be, and it actually changes your experience
Mm,
of how it is, even when it's no different to, the pain might not have been any different in terms of its intensity for both births, but how you felt it, how you uh, received it was different based on your perception. And I think understanding normal newborn behaviors and a baby's needs and, you know, the ways that we are primed to be able to respond to those needs without falling into a pit of depression and anxiety and all those things helps us to be able to cope. It helps us to be able to, yeah, to accept that this season of our life and this season of our children's lives and yeah, when we're not being fed all this or taking on board all this um information from outside of our little family unit and what we know our baby to be or their needs and our needs and all that, when we're listening to too much of the shoulds out there, that can really, really negatively impact. So yeah, I talk about when I work with people in their pregnancies usually after they've had a traumatic first birth, but I talk about the importance of finding time and space to like tune out to all that outside noise and to come inwards and to really listen to and honor what your body is saying to you. I liked hearing you share earlier about that in your pregnancy you wanted to be around the home a lot near the end there, and you honored that and it felt good. And that's an example of what I mean. I don't mean, like I think it's problematic when we say to people, you just need to listen to your intuition and listen to your body, because I think that is a too hard ask for somebody who is completely out of practice with that. But it's those sorts of things. Notice when your intuition or your body is saying, I need to rest and rest. Notice when your body is saying, I need to eat and eat. Notice when you are not wanting to be social and you just want to, stay at home. Do that. These are the practices we need to put in place in the lead up to our births and our mothering, postpartum experience, so that we're good at practicing, at doing that, at tuning in, listening, and not being so swayed by all the shoulds and the outside, noise, the outside expectations, and yeah, developing confidence in our intuition and our
yeah.
bodies. Mm.
Yeah, yeah. And it was a big difference. I was talking to Dad on the phone. I can't remember if it was just after my birth or a few weeks after,
Mm.
but he said, oh, I just think you read way too much in your first pregnancy. Um, and it made things hard for you. I'm like, Dad, I read so much more in my second pregnancy. But the things I read were about physiological processes and what's biologically normal. And so it wasn't telling me what I should do. It was telling me what is, and that gave me the knowledge I needed to know what was happening and to honor biology and physiology, but to listen to what I needed around it.
Mm.
And what felt right around that and to support it. And yeah, like if I look at my postpartums with Asher, I was going for walks on like, I think my first walk was day 5
Mm.
after a really big birth.
Mm.
Um, and then I I think it was around day 14. Um, so the lockdown levels changed and you could combine your bubble with someone within your region or a neighboring region. And so my parents are in the Waikato, so my mum and my sister were able to come down and stay. So they came and stayed. And I went for this giant walk with my mum and sister. It was 6 kilometers, 2 weeks after having a baby. And we had got lost, so we'd walked further than we intended, but what was I doing? And then I got home and something made me laugh and I wet myself like completely because my pelvic floor was like, what have you done to me? And then
Mm.
I was retelling the story to Tony because it was really funny. And I wet myself again, completely again. And it's
Right.
like, okay, that was a bad idea, wasn't it? And with Jordan, I was really intentional about staying pretty much home for 2 weeks. I did go to the chiropractor a few days after he was born because I was so sore.
Mm.
And I just wanted an adjustment in the back of my hips, and that did help. And I did go out for a very small walk a week postpartum to take some photos for my sister-in-law because she was about to have a baby too.
Mm.
Um, and then I went home and stayed in bed the rest of the day.
Yeah.
And it just was so different. Like my body's healed in such a different way and still like I'm a year postpartum and I haven't been for a run because I want to give my body time and space to truly be ready. I don't
Mm.
want to rush it.
Mm.
Yeah.
I love that. I love that honoring of, yeah, your needs based on your self-knowledge, not, not all this like, yeah, outside influence.
Mm,
That's great. Um, can you, you've shared a couple of times that you do birth photography, and I think you do other photography too. Is there any link that you see between your work and how you perceive or how you have birthed and mothered yourself?
mm. Yeah. I mean, my photography started at my sister-in-law's home birth.
Mm.
Like I had this entry-level camera that I'd actually bought it when I met Tony because I was like, this man is beautiful. And I just knew that we were going to get married. And I was like, I want a camera because I'm going to have babies one day. And I want to take photos of my babies. So I had this camera. I took it to my sister-in-law's birth. And this was her first baby too. And she planned a home birth. And so I went and photographed that. And for me, it was really stark seeing the difference between like my first birth felt like getting a job done that was
Mm.
unpleasant, and her birth was filled with laughter and she was a very quiet birther too, so that was quite different. But I'm not that there's a right or wrong, I really don't think there is, but her birth was really peaceful and she listened to her body, and she did have a moment where she was freaking out and she's like, nah, if this isn't hasn't happened by the morning, I want to go to hospital. But then her sister-in-law on the other side gave her a bit of a pep talk and was like, look, you can do this. Your body was made to do this. And yeah, capturing her birth and seeing that birth could be enjoyable and beautiful and just seeing the birth take place at home, which I had wanted, but it hadn't happened, was really beautiful and quite healing as well, just seeing this beautiful birth. Um, So that, yeah, I was driving home from there on such a high, and I was like, I need to do this for a job. Like, I need a better camera because my camera could not cope with the low light that birth likes to take place in. Um, and yeah, so that was the beginning of, at that stage, I called it Birth Beheld. It's now a light beheld, and it now is families as well.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, I think entering people's really vulnerable spaces and seeing how differently people process that transition into parenthood as well. Like the it's so different in every space I enter, and some spaces feel really accepting of what's happened, and some I walk into and I can see that they're struggling because they're like they've been told what they should and shouldn't be doing. Um, so yeah, it is a real honor to be able to step into those spaces with like not just birth spaces, that's so sacred, but also newborn spaces. Um, yeah, just being invited in and I like understanding what people are likely going through. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's so special. You talked about it, right? Like when you were laboring with Jordan, that is Jordan? Yeah,
Yes.
Jordan. That you were liking laboring on your own, but you wanted these other people. You wanted somebody there for your boy, and you wanted the photographer, the person who your sister-in-law was it, who was going to be photographing your birth, whoever it
My
was.
sister-in-law had my son, and
Oh,
then
right.
a really sweet friend was taking photos.
Yeah. Awesome. Um, because we don't, it's such a momentous occasion, giving birth, and we don't get to have that occasion again. And so, what other big celebratory occasions do we have in our lives where we wouldn't capture it on camera or video, because we like to go back and revisit those moments in our lives. And so I'm always like, you know, encouraging people to consider having somebody take photos at the birth. It doesn't necessarily have to be somebody who's good at it. Just any photos are better than no photos. But yeah, such a beautiful way of remembering and celebrating this occasion, and is to have those amazing photos to look back on, right? And it is
Yeah,
such an
yes.
honor to be invited into somebody's birth space.
Yes. And I remember reading your book and being really struck by your desire to invite people into that space and to share like hello, to share your birth and what it could look like. And that was a big part of my decision to have kind of as many people as I did,
Oh,
because I wanted to share
beautiful.
that.
Oh, that's nice. Yeah. So with my births, because my birth stories are included in my book, I talk about having sort of 9 or 10 people at each of my births, because for that reason, I wanted everybody to be there to celebrate in this, special occasion. And yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Oh, that's beautiful to hear.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think we probably need to wind this up. You and I, it feels like we could keep talking on and on about this stuff, but it's been a,
Yes.
a really special morning hearing all about your journey, Georgia, and thanks for also sharing a bit of Tony's experience. And thank you, Tony, for allowing you to share that. I think that's going to be a really important and valuable gift for listeners. And yeah, so thank you.
Thank you. It's been, yeah, really special to share this. And yeah, I remember the day Jordan was born, I just felt very strongly like this is a story that is meant to be shared. And then when we were messaging later in the week and you said like that was an option, I was like, and this is where I meant to share it. I mean, obviously other spaces too. Like, um, I share it with pretty much anyone I can, but it just felt like such, yeah, just the right thing.
Ah, love that. Thank you, Georgia. That was, yeah, when you shared your story with me, I'm like, oh, if you want to come on the podcast, I would love to have you share as I do. So if you're listening to this and you've ventured through a kind of a healing journey, or have a powerful story of birth to share. get in touch because, I think this is such a gift to be able to share these sorts of stories and people can learn and take tidbits from what has helped you and your man, through this journey and yeah, put it into their own experience. All right, you have a beautiful day, eh?
You too. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's been great. Loved
Yeah.
it.